So this talk is really about getting in the zone for ecology, and it might be surprising to most because, again, a lot of us might think that we don't have a lot of power in our hands. But I'm going to show you a few examples, tell you a couple of stories about what I've done on my property here in London, which is quite a big urban property. It's 52 feet wide by 217 feet deep, which again isn't huge, but for an urban area, that's a pretty big property. Right here. So let's start back in history a little bit. This is probably only about 300 years ago. If you're fortunate enough to go to the Appalachian Museum of Forests in southern Ohio, you'll see this mural painted on the wall. This mural is a depiction of what our forests look like in eastern North America about 300 years ago. And what you see is that vine that's hanging there is about the thickness of an average person's waist. And the trees, that tree that is right beside the vine is called the American chestnut, which used to be our most common hardwood. Now we have maybe 2 or 3 of these growing outside of London. Because of diseases that have been moved around the world, a lot of our common things now are extremely rare, like this chestnut tree. But the other thing that you'll see that's missing from our current picture of going into the woods, you might be able to see the wood bison in the background. We used to have bison in southern Ontario, not the plains bison, but a very similar species called the wood bison. And you'll see the native people, if you look really closely, behind a tree, about to stalk the bison. And a little to the top left of the photograph, you'll see the eastern cougar moving through the woods as well. You won't see much ground cover here at all either, because some of these trees, now that we have like sugar maples and our oaks, we're 1,000 years old. And now in a city, if one of our sugar maple trees gets to 120 years before it's cut down by the city because it's not growing well, we would be lucky. So we've really lost what our old growth ecosystem looked like. And all of Carolina, Canada was an old growth ecosystem. We had an amazing fluctuation between these teeming old growth forests and prairies and wetlands. So we had diverse habitats, and now of course we have less than 1% of our prairies. So we really lost a lot, but this section of the talk isn't about the loss. It's about what we can really win by taking small steps. And again, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about this. So this is the largest dragonfly in North America. It's called the swamp darner. And these are a few other dragonflies. And this is from my pond. I built a pond in my backyard, and I added about 25 species of native plants. Before I knew it, before I could even get the pond filled up, forget the plants, those dragonflies were buzzing all around my head. They were looking for places to lay their eggs. I called a friend of mine who is an expert, and I said, "What's this one? I don't know it." He said, "That's a swamp darner. Where did you take that picture? What Ontario park were you in?" I said, "I was in my backyard." He said, "Well, do you have a lot of old trees with some openings in the canopy and some water?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, that's a female looking to lay her eggs." So before I hardly did anything with this pond, the dragonflies were saying, "Okay, thanks, it's time to get started." And then of course not long after, and virtually any water body in the city, you can get American toads coming in to lay eggs. And then not long after, I had American toads laying eggs, and I had tadpoles all over the place. And then the tadpoles metamorphosed, they transmuted into toadlets all over the backyard. This was around the time we started seeing owls, and sometimes not even at night, but during the day. And soon after that, outside of the second floor balcony of our bedroom, we saw Curly, Larry, and Moe just like peeking at me as I was having my morning coffee. I was like, somebody is watching me. Sure enough, I turned, and there were the owls. And I always like to say the one on the left looked like it wanted to kill me. The one in the middle always looked like I was going to kill it. And then the one on the edge was so indifferent. And because of these owls, our neighborhood became quite famous for our house. And people came over all the time. But the interesting association, the powerful connection is that this story. One of the days in broad daylight, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the babies crash landed on the back lawn, and there was like a 5-alarm alert in the house. We're almost ready to go out and rescue the owls when the parent flew down and landed beside the baby, and then they flew up onto the fence, and then another one of the babies crash landed right beside it. And what they were doing is they were teaching their young how to feed on the toadlets in our grass. So not only did we build the baseball field and the cornfield, and the baseball players showed up, so to speak, right? If you build it, they will come. But the toads came, then the owls came. It all started coming back together. And it wasn't just because of the water. It was because of the native plants as well. The native plants are the natural calling card to bring wildlife home to our systems, where we have excluded wildlife by creating landscapes that are not suitable for wildlife to live in. So if we look at the forests, for example, this is the bloodroot. It's an incredible plant. It's one of the first to come up in the spring in terms of flowering. It's got a beautiful flower. And then the seeds come out. And the seeds have these amazing little white things on them called eliosomes. What's great about this is that the eliosomes aren't just pretty little white things. What they are is they're another calling card in themselves. So it's like it's a story within a story. When the bloodroot offers this and these seeds fall to the ground, the ants will come in and pick up the seeds and take them to their colony. They pull off that fleshy white eliosome, which is rich in fatty acids, proteins, and lipids, and they rear their young ants with this, and because it's one of the best foods. And then once they're finished rearing their young, then they will take the seeds with the rest of the materials that they don't want inside of their colony, and they farm them. They permaculture these seeds throughout the forest. So essentially, they are distributing these seeds. And it's not just bloodroot. Mayapple, white trillium, red trillium, painted trillium, they all have seeds with eliosomes, these offerings, right? So it's an ultimate cooperation between plants and animals. It's really critical. And there's a close-up of the eliosomes on a leaf after they've fallen off the plant. Some other plants that have eliosomes, and really important plants of the forest, are blue cohosh. It's also important of the First Nations cultures, in particular this one of the Ojibwe or the Anishinaabe. There's a native plant nursery here run by Aamjiwnaut First Nation. I can't say the word because it's in their language, but you really should see this nursery. They've got a lot of forest plants that I'm talking about for sale today. And this plant was often called the female plant because it was really important. They made a tea out of it that they used as an epidural for women during childbirth, and they also used it for menstrual cramps. And so when I've done work with First Nations and spent some time with them, and I was always drawn to this plant, I can remember Isaac Day saying, "You have female energy. You're like this plant." And I said, "Okay, I have female energy." But they often said that certain plants will speak to you. And instead of knowing all of the medicines as knowledge, this particular First Nation elder told me is that you got to get down on your hands and knees. He made me spend 3 hours with a bloodroot plant on my hands and knees talking to the plant. And after about 2 hours, when my legs started going numb, I was wondering if it was hallucinations or if I was actually talking to the plant. But I actually got amazing messages from the plant. Some other great plants that you can buy today. Jack in the pulpit. Very interesting and fascinating plant of the lowland. If you take a look on the left there, that's what it looks like when it's flowering. And then on the right in the fall, this is Jack in the pulpit with the beautiful red seed head. So you get two great forms of this plant. And I know a lot of people will sometimes say native plants aren't pretty enough, they're not big enough. You can find so many examples that will be eye candy enough for you in various seasons. Another one that I really like that doesn't have any color at all is the maidenhair fern on the left. I'm showing you this slide not just because I love this fern, but the fern has qualities. Later on today at 3:30, I'm giving a talk on forest therapy or forest bathing, One of the reasons why we love nature so much and being in nature is because of fractals. Fractals were talked about a lot in the press about 10, 15 years ago. What fractals are essentially, they're very complicated, but to summarize them is that they are patterns. So when you look at a mountain, or when you look at a pine tree, what you're seeing is a pine needle on a pine branch, on another branch, on the trunk. There's something inside of us that really calms us and soothes us when we see these ancient patterns that are essentially ingrained in our DNA. This is a picture of my front yard. It looks like we could be in a provincial park because we've got trilliums, a couple of types of trilliums, Jack in the pulpit in the top left before it's flowering, and about 11 species of native plants you can see here, with a little bit of space in between, because I really like to have native plant installations or gardens kind of manicured a little bit, because I want to show that we're not just hippies out there saying, peace brother, native plants for the world. You know, we really want to show that this can make your house look really nice while you're making a difference. This is a plant that we all could have and should have because it's edible. The flower smells a little bit like rotting flesh, but only if you stick your nose in it, all right? So don't worry, it's not going to scare people away. It needs to be pollinated by bottle flies, either green or blue, which are carrion flies, which are always around our yards. They can only fly within 10 feet of each tree, so you need to have at least 2 trees. And it is the largest native fruit in North America, called the pawpaw tree. It needs to grow in forests. So our early settlers, when they cleared all the forests because they needed to get great production, they essentially obliterated this plant. To me, it is the best tasting fruit in the world. It's like a cross between a mango, banana, custard. It's a little bit soft and some people don't like the texture. The seeds are really large, so they're easy to take out. It is a superfruit. It's like broccoli, bananas, all of those amazing things, minerals and vitamins that we find in things we call superfruits. It's right here in our native plants. So I highly recommend this tree. It doesn't get very big, maybe 15 to 20 feet. I now have 17 growing at my place. Only one is in flower. They need to grow in the shade when they're young. That's why they were decimated early on when they removed the forests. But when they get a little larger, they can be in full sun. This is another amazing native plant that you can eat. It's called the mayapple. You can see this is the flower. The flowers hang under an umbrella-like parasol of the leaves. But if you eat the fruit right there when it's green, it will kill you. So I don't recommend doing this. But if you're patient and you wait until they get a little bigger and they're yellow and they're orange, they are incredibly great, high in vitamin C, a lot of little seeds that have eliosomes again, so you can give them to the ants. But I now have 250 of these in my front yard, which isn't very large. And after I got them established, I was so excited because I've got a crop. Like in some places they have mayapple festivals where they make jams and jellies and people are dancing in the streets like mayapple this, mayapple that. But squirrels like them, right? So after a while in my front yard, they started getting almost every single one. So the next year I said to my wife, Ramola, I said, I'm gonna harvest them a little early because I'm pretty sure I know when they're just ripe, when the squirrels don't like them, but they're ripe enough that they won't kill me. And she looked at me like that face that a wife often looks at a husband. And when I brought them inside, she said, those are green. And I was like, no, they've got some yellow, and I held them up in the light. So I was really excited. I beat the squirrels and I ate a bunch. And of course, I felt sick. And so it wasn't long after that I was, passing my mayapple in the bathroom quite quickly. So I don't recommend it. And this is an example of what not to do, but also what people must have done for the millennia, right? People have experimented in this way. There are some things that are safe through and through from the beginning to the end. Mayapple, when they're ripe, are completely safe. Another amazing thing that I mentioned about native plants is that pound per pound, leaf per leaf, they attract insects where non-native plants don't. Non-native plants are amazing plants where they're found, right? And even where they are here, we really appreciate them and we value them. And we kill them a lot because non-native plants don't have the insect associations that can keep them in check. So often our non-native plants will go wild and they'll make life really difficult for our native plants. An example would be clematis. A lot of people love to buy clematis in the nursery. If you buy a beautiful purple clematis, you might get 1 or 2 insects that can nectar on it. No insects can feed on it. Our native clematis, called Virginia's bower, it has 40 to 60 species of insects. And a lot of people might say, I don't want insects. What are they going to do, destroy my plant? It's not like that. It's an amazing association. They've co-evolved together, so they take just the right amount. You often don't even notice it. But what they do is when they bring in these insects, they bring in larger insects that will feed on them. And then when those larger insects come, we get birds. And without that, we don't have our ecosystems. And I'll explain this with a great example at the end. But here are some of the insects that we should have commonly in London, but we don't. The Saturn moth at the top left, the Luna moth, and then the Sphinx moth. These are really big moths. If you ever have these at a party, they're the ultimate party trick, especially for kids. Kids will see these moths, they'll come out at night. So if you, like this was at a wedding reception where both of these moths were, there's a lot of music, they were on the walls, attracted to the lights. The kids were so inspired that I swear a few of these kids in the future will be really compelled to conserve nature because they value it. When we lose that connection and we don't have the things that inspire us, we don't even really think about it because it's something so far off that we've forgotten about. And the birds. This bird at the left here is the yellow-billed cuckoo. I used to live off the grid on Peely Island for 12 years. The most common nesting bird around me was the yellow-billed cuckoo. It's about a size of 1.5 times the size of a robin. They eat nothing but caterpillars, and often on oak trees. Oak trees will give you 500 species of butterflies and moths alone. Forget beetles and all the other insects. They require oak trees for their life cycle. And of course, frogs will eat insects, so once you get the insects back, you'll get things like great tree frog, and then other birds as well. This is a quick shot of my house initially when I got it, a few years after. This is in Wortley Village. So in the beginning, the top left there, I didn't really know anything about gardening, and so the design was such that the plants were super tall and you could barely see the house by mid-July. That was what I call the hippie garden. Then I added some shrubs and changed things a little bit, added some color to the house, and started to add some features like yellow lady slippers and Michigan lily. These are native plants that you look at and they stop people on the sidewalk. They can't believe, they'll often take pictures and then try to figure out what they are. And then at the top right there, you could hire somebody like me or get some advice from a friend or go to Caroline in Canada or a non-profit where we can get you some advice to do a design. And it's often fun to do the research on your own. This is my backyard here, and again, there are close to now 220 species of native plants. There's also a lawn where we can play sports. There's a basketball court where we can shoot some hoop. And there's a nice place where we can drink beer or have wine in a summer afternoon. But if you notice the edges, that's where the wildlife habitat exists. That's where we have salamanders and even some turtles that have come over from the coast, crossed Warncliffe Avenue. Some tiny hatchling painted turtles and snapping turtles in the pond that have made this amazing trek, because when they hatch out of these nests, their duty is to find a new wetland and go beyond the wetland of their parents. And so if there are none around, they wander endlessly until they get hit on the roads. So you don't have to exclude fun to invite nature back. That's the message here, is that we can have incredible impact by sharing our landscape. InTheZoneGardens.ca is an amazing place to start. They're free resources. And another thing, if you have any competitive nature in you, Toronto has like 2,000 or 3,000 people who signed up for In The Zone. Down in Windsor, an area, they have close to 500. London, at our last count, after doing talks like this, we have 30. So I'm not sure what's happening to the forest city. but it's not looking very green at the moment. And I could have made up these numbers so that everybody runs out there and says, oh my gosh, we've got to sign up for In the Zone Gardens. But go and check over here. It's a really interesting thing. Check in with World Wildlife Fund and with Carolinian Canada. It's great to see. And another great example to get you into native plants is this association with insects. I can't harp on it enough. This is the hop tree. It's one of our only native citrus trees. It only gets to about 20 feet tall, if that. It's the food source of the largest butterfly in North America. This butterfly can only lay its eggs on this or prickly ash, only 2 plants. You might often find this within 20 minutes of putting this on my property in Wortley Village. This little speck appeared. Not much longer after that, this appeared. This is not a bird dropping. If you touch this, it sends out this little antenna-like apparatus and a pungent smell that makes you jump back. Or if you're a bird, it does this so that you don't eat it. First of all, why would a bird want to eat a bird dropping? If you're patient enough and you don't kill it and say, oh my gosh, I recognize a caterpillar is eating my plant. They never eat the whole plant. They only eat a section. This is what shows up, the largest butterfly in North America. Without native plants, you don't have a chance of having these caterpillars around. And if you want to learn more, this is the rock star of the movement, Douglas Tallamy on the left. Yes, Jarmo Jalava is also Carolinian Canada's rock star on the right, but we won't talk about him right now. Bringing Nature Home is a book that Douglas Tallamy wrote about 10 years ago because he discovered this association with native plants. He's an entomologist. He cataloged and said, I'm going to look at all butterflies and moths. I'm going to determine how many species feed on each native plant. And once he did that, everybody wanted him to speak. So he wrote this book and said, I'm tired of speaking. Here's the book, read about it yourself. Now that he's written the book, he just has to fly all over the world to give his talks because he's in huge demand. It's a compelling read. It's not very expensive. And he should really be on TED Talks because his talk is fascinating. In one 20-second span, he'll go through 50 insects that need an oak tree. And the ultimate example of this is the black-capped chickadee, which we have quite commonly here in the city. They are a seed eater. They eat seeds 90% of their time. Does anybody notice anything about this chickadee? It's got nothing but insects in its bill. That's because when they lay their eggs, they have to collect insects to feed their young. If you put up a nest box for the black-capped chickadee, they cannot resist. They have to lay eggs. So what Douglas Tallamy and his grad students did, they found a neighborhood in Delaware where there was a street with nothing but non-native trees. So things like Norway maple and all sorts of other species from other parts of the world. Then they found a street not far away with nothing but native trees. They put up a number of nest boxes on both. Chickadees came in and laid their eggs. And what they found is really what I've been saying, is that all 8 clutches that were on the street with non-native trees, all of the young that hatched out successfully died. And all of the young on the street with native trees were all successful. And the reason is the non-native trees, these chickadees need to collect 7,000 caterpillars per hour to feed their young. So without the caterpillars, without the insects, without the native plant association, there is no possible way. Chickadees can only fly 50 to 100 meters away from their nest. So if you want birds around, you want insects around, and if you want insects around, you have to have native plants. So that is my talk. Thanks for sticking around. We've got so many other great talks and so many amazing places where you can buy native plants. I can be here for a few more minutes if you have any personal questions about your gardens. Thanks again.